Angular 5 data binding. So today we'll be looking into the data binding options between the view and the component. Angular 5 data binding can be broadly classified into two categories: one-way data binding and two-way data binding. So in one-way data binding, basically we have interpolation, property binding, attribute binding, that's from component to view, and then events, that's from view to component. And then we have our two-way binding, that's in that we have ngModel, that's used for bidirectional communication between view and component, and then events, that's also used for bidirectional communication between view and components. Now we are going to open our Visual Studio Code and start to code data binding. So in Visual Studio Code, we are going to click on View and then go to Integrated Terminal and then navigate to our folder, which is CDC and then CD Projects. Here we're going to type the command ng new and the project name, which is Data Binding, and hit enter. This is going to create a new folder under projects named Data Binding and set up our project files, download our project files and set it up. Once the installation is complete, then we are going to open the project. Our binaries look fine. We see that there is a warning for FS events, which is okay because this is for Darwin based operating systems and not for Windows, so we are pretty much fine. We'll click on File, Open Folder, go to C Projects and click on Data Binding and then select Folder. Now we have our project open. We're going to go to packages.json and we're going to check the version. It's 5.0.0 in all the modules, animation, compiler, core, everything looks good. We're going to close package.json, close the welcome screen. Now we are going to go to view and click on integrated terminal, and then we're going to drag it up a little bit and then generate component by typing ng generate space component space components, which is the directory name, and then under it whatever name you want to give for the component. We'll give data binding concept and hit enter. This will generate the component for us. Now we can close this terminal and then we'll click on source and then app and then components. We can see our newly generated component. Then we go to app.component.html and delete all this code, and then we go to app.component.ts, which is the TypeScript file, and we delete this variable. Then click on data binding TypeScript file and copy the name of the selector, which is app data binding concept, and then place it in app.component.html, just like this. Now you can open up the terminal, save all the files, open up the terminal and launch the project by typing ng serve space hyphen hyphen open. So our website came up with localhost port 4200 with data binding concepts works. Now we'll close the terminal and we'll set up the project in such a way that the Visual Studio Code window is a little bit minimized and we have the browser on the other side so that we can actually see the code as it gets compiled and we save it. Now we'll delete all the content of this HTML file and replace the content with another wording. Let's say we type testing Angular 5 data bindings. And once we save it, Control S, so on the fly it's going to actually compile the code and show it in browser. That's because the webpack is running. We'll confirm this by actually going to integrated terminal and see that the webpack is running and the code was compiled successfully. We'll pull it down a little bit, and as you can see that in the browser window, you can see that the text was perfectly replicated testing Angular 5 data binding, so it works. Now we are going to code the first interpolation binding. we'll create a paragraph tag. This is just the heading. Now we go to the TypeScript file and create variable named interpolation value of type string and assign a value to it. Interpolation successful. Now copy this variable name and go to the HTML page and then put two curly braces, opening and closing, and then place this value in the middle. Now you have to save both the files, and once you save it, you will see that the browser starts to get updated and you have your new value, interpolation successful, as the variable name. So your interpolation data binding from component to the view was successful. Let's update this variable with another name. Let's say testing interpolation successfully, and then save it. You will see that the browser will immediately get updated with the new value, which is testing interpolation successfully. So our interpolation works. Now since we'll be now doing a property binding, so we'll go to the HTML and actually place an empty line under the heading, kind of a little bit of indentation, just to make the page look a little bit decent in terms of separation between the first interpolation value and the next property binding. Here we create a property value variable in TypeScript file of type string and assign it a value, which is testing property value successfully. Now we are going to go to the HTML file. We'll save this, then we'll go to HTML file, and here we are going to first do a little bit of indentation. Let's copy this and place it out here so that it's a demarcation line. Above logic is for interpolation. Let's put the heading to bold and kind of make it italics so it'll look a little bit good. Now let's copy this heading and put it down under and rename it to property binding using value keyword. So this is value property binding that we'll be doing. Then let's create a text box. Input type is equal to text. We'll name the text box. You can name it whatever you want to. Text, property, anything you want. And then place the value inside the brackets and then put the variable name, what we declared out here in the TypeScript file, property value, and paste it here, and then close the input tag. Now once you save it, it's going to compile and the browser is going to get updated with the new value in the text box. Oh, so the variable that we had put in the TypeScript had a little bit longer value, so we are going to actually increase the width of the text box. Style width colon, let's say, yeah, let's see, no, So we'll put it to 330, I guess. Yeah, now it looks good. So we can see the whole text. This binds property value to the result of expression, so we look good. First we'll copy this line and place it down for our next property binding so that we can differentiate between the two. Now we come to the TypeScript and we create another variable, property value, using bind value, and assign it a value, whatever you want to give. So let's say testing bind value, bind hyphen value, property binding. Testing bind hyphen value, property binding. We'll save this and then we'll go to the HTML file. We're going to copy this line, paste it here. Before that, we'll take out this BR tag because that's making it next line on the browser and we don't have that much space on the screen. So we're also going to update the heading and make it more meaningful by actually typing one-way component to view binding. And that is what it is. These bindings are from component to view. We have done one interpolation and one property binding, and we're about to do the second property binding using bind hyphen value. So we'll copy this text box, place it down, and then we're going to update first the name, we change the name, and then we're going to take the variable from the TypeScript and place it out here. Then lastly, we are going to update this keyword, take out the brackets and put bind hyphen value. And now when we save it, compile it, it gets compiled and we can see the updated value using bind hyphen value property binding. And so in our TypeScript, whatever is the value, that's getting reflected in the browser. So our property binding looks good. Now we'll create attribute binding. First we are going to declare a variable. Let's say attribute value is the name of the variable of type string, and we'll assign it a value. Then we'll save this and go to our HTML page, copy this line. Oh, I'll change the heading of the previous property binding to bind hyphen value and copy this line, update the heading to attribute binding, and then create another text box. We'll copy the above text box code and place it down. Here we'll update the name to attribute property. Then we'll go to TypeScript file and copy the attribute value variable and place it here. Text box status and put it to false so that when we load the page, it actually turns the text box disabled. And then we are going to have written out here disabled equal to text box status. that variable name in the TypeScript, that we'll paste it out here. And now we'll save it. This compiles the code and reloads the page. Now you can see that the attribute binding is actually, the text box attribute binding is actually disabled and you can't make any changes, whereas in the above property binding, the text box, you can make a change, just write test or something and then delete it. It works. And so our attribute binding is successful and completed. So our component to view data binding is complete. And now we'll comment all this code in the HTML and save it. Then we'll go to the TypeScript file and we'll comment all the variables that we created and save it. Now we have a blank page to start with. Now we are going to start coding the one-way binding from view to component. So basically here we'll be using events. What it means is that we are going to pass the value from the view using an event.Click by calling the function and invoking the code that's written in the function in the TypeScript file. So we'll create a button and then give name to the button. And then give a value, let's say click me. We'll also give some styling to the button so that it actually looks like a button by setting a height and the width, and then finally putting the click event and putting a function name that will be called when this click event of the button is being fired. We'll take the same function name, go to the code behind file, which is our TypeScript file, and code it, create it public. Now we're going to put console.log and put hard-coded value so that this value is being passed to the component. Now we save it. We can see the button. We'll press F12 to see the console on the browser. Here comes the console, and we press click me and we get the value successfully. So from the UI, which is the view, we pass the value to the component, and we're going to change the value to something else. Let's say again, save it, click. Here we get the value, updated value again. Now we'll pass some parameters from this function to the component. So we'll put, let's say, 1 as the parameter, and then update the function to take input parameter as string. Update this console.log to show val parameter, delete this, and now save it. On saving, Webpack compiles the code and we click, and then we can see 1 was passed. So we successfully passed the parameter also from the view to the component, and so our view to component one-way binding is complete. Now our one-way binding is complete. We are going to comment this code in the HTML. Then we'll go to the TypeScript file and we'll comment this function, and then we'll start to code the two-way binding using ngModel directive. We'll create the heading, two-way binding. We'll create the text box and we'll use ngModel directive. Note that we have parentheses within the square brackets and then we write ngModel. Earlier the ngModel was within the square brackets only, and we had ngModel change where we used to put it in parentheses, but this parentheses and the square bracket for ngModel is the short form of ngModel directive and ngModel change event. Now we'll go to TypeScript file and we'll create a name variable of type string and will not assign any value to it. We also need to go to app.module.ts file and we need to import the forms module because the ngModel directive resides in forms module. So we do an import forms module from @ Angular forms, We also need to go to the ngModel decorator, and in the imports we need to take this forms module and put an entry. We'll save this and then we'll go to our data binding concepts.html, and here we are going to actually create paragraph tag, and then we are going to use interpolation to actually display the name that we input in the above text box. So here we compile the code, and now you can see that whatever I'm typing on the text box, that's getting replicated. So actually I'm inputting the data into the UI, it goes to the name variable in the template and then comes back on the screen using interpolation. Now we'll create two-way binding using events, and so first we are going to create a text box in which we are going to enter the values. Now we are going to use input event and assign a variable that we are going to create in the TypeScript file here. This variable name will get binded to the input event in the HTML file. Copy it, place it here, then equal to event.target.value, $event.target.value. Every time the input event is being fired, this variable will keep getting updated in the TypeScript file. And then we are going to use interpolation, double curly braces start, and then double curly braces close. We are going to copy the variable name. We are going to place it in the curly braces, and that's interpolation, just to get the value back on the screen from the component. And so our two-way binding using event is complete. We are going to type something, two-way binding, it looks good. So as I type, you can see that it's getting updated on the UI, and when I delete it, it gets deleted. So our two-way binding using events is complete. That's all for this tutorial. Thank you.